You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Land. This podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts Tiffany Cruikshank and Katya Bach as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness. Hello and welcome, or welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. The yoga sphere has an uneasy overlap with the fitness, wellness, and beauty worlds in that we can inadvertently communicate harmful messages around body image. There are some pretty powerful stereotypes around who the practice is for and what that student can do that can drown out the really positive impact yoga can have, not just on physical health, but on mental health too. Today's guest is both personally and professionally passionate about replacing those negative messages with positive ones, or at least with those that inspire neutral, non-judgmental curiosity. I'm talking to self-proclaimed diet disruptor and active aging advocate, Alison Heilig. You'll remember from Alison's previous 2 episodes of the podcast, episode 32 on yoga for athletes and 96 on creating consistent change, that she is a yoga medicine therapeutic specialist, plus a strength, running, durability, and nutrition coach with multiple certifications under her belt. She is also a master's ultra marathoner and weightlifter and has recently taken over the well-known blog Fit Bottom Girls, the place for active, athletic, and adventurous women, or those who aspire to be. So let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of body image with Alison Heilig. Hi, Alison. Welcome back to the Yoga Medicine Podcast for your 3rd visit. Thank you again for making time for us today.
Lucky number 3.
Yeah. And this is a good one. This is going to be a juicy one today because we are heading straight into body image.
Yeah. What a loaded subject to talk about too, right? When you reached out to me about it, I was like, I love that we're going to go there. I love that we're going to have this conversation and that we're going to go there. And I know that as we get into this subject, we'll talk a little bit more about kind of the threads that connected this, that you and I have had some similar experiences and the way we grew up and how it shaped our body image is such a good subject, I think, to dig into.
I think especially in the context of yoga, where we think we've created this safe space where all are welcome and it's not about how you look, it's about how you feel. But I don't know that that's as true as we would like it to be. I was reflecting this morning and I thought, even just a few years ago, I would be aware in every yoga space I went into what size I was in comparison to the rest of the room. I would know instantly whether I was the biggest person in the room or one of the biggest people in the room. And the fact that that information would even register is crazy to me when I look at it from the outside.
Yeah. And I think it even extends even beyond the way that you look and the shape and the size of your body. There's, some comparison, because when we look at what body image is, right, it's really this combination of your thoughts and your perceptions and your feelings and your behaviors around your physical appearance. So, I mean, that can mean any number of things and be any realm, right? I mean, like, I know that we for years as a yoga community have been trying to let people know that, like the full expression of the pose is not like the gold standard, right? That you can come to yoga and you can have the benefits of it, even if you're not as able as the person next to you, right? So I think there's still, like to your point, there's a lot of different ways that we compare ourselves to other people in a yoga room. Yeah.
And for me, it was always size because I'm pretty flexible. But you're right. There was probably somebody next to me watching me in an overhead bind-in dancers pose, thinking about how fat I was, going, man, look at what she can do with her body. So we've got so many different ways to be failures, haven't we? And we never seem to register the ways that we're successes.
We do. I mean, this It's so interesting too, because what I realized, like, as I was digging into body image and what do we know in the research and what have we found, what are the stats, right? One of the things that was really interesting to me that you really have to think about, because I think we all know it on some level, but it we we really need to kind of spend some time with the fact that body image is a mental construct. It's a representation. It's not necessarily representative of fact. It's a perception, it's thoughts, it's emotions. These are not necessarily facts about us, right? And what I think is really interesting about that is that representation, that perception, that construct that we have around how we think about our bodies really heavily influences and affects the way that we interact with the world in our bodies, right? So it affects how much we enjoy a yoga class, right? Like, it doesn't matter if, to the outside, it looks like we're able to keep up and we're having a good time. It's really like the almost that paranoia within ourselves of like, everybody's looking at me. I'm the fattest one in the room. I can't touch my toes, right? All of these things that we're telling ourselves, all of these perceptions, all of these thoughts, all of these feelings, and the behaviors that are associated with that are like further validating our experience within that yoga class. Like, I suck at yoga. I'm too fat to do this. Like, it's the experience that we're having and the way that we're interacting with the world and how much we enjoy our lives are really tied to how we feel about our bodies, these perceptions and beliefs we have.
And I think that makes them almost more difficult to change, because if it were factual, you just present yourself
Yeah,
with alternate facts. I mean, gosh, if the
totally.
last few years have taught us anything, it's how easy it is to find alternative stories, different bundles of
Yes.
facts to choose from. But it's not that straightforward. It's beliefs and perceptions. And so the very way we see the world is shaped by those beliefs. We only tend to see information that reinforces those beliefs, and it
Yeah.
becomes this self perpetuating philosophy
Yeah.
that we're not even often consciously aware of because it's buried so
Mhm.
deep. So
Yeah.
maybe we talk about how body image is
Mm.
formed. Like, we're not born with it. Where does it come from?
Yeah. Um, I went, so I talk about facts. I went digging for some stats for us. So I thought that this would be interesting to kind of look at who was surveyed and kind of where does it start and what is going on, right? So I've got some stats for you here, and I was appalled. Um, by age 3, children have often internalized stereotypes about body size, and children as young as 5 start to express concerns about their own weight or shape.
I've
3
seen this.
and 5.
I've seen this. I remember my little niece coming to visit us when she was about 4.5, and we offered her something to eat. She said, "Oh no, I can't have that. I'll get fat." And I remember thinking,
Mm.
"What are you talking about? You're a baby. How are you even?" And I don't even know if she knew what that meant, but she'd
Right.
obviously heard it, and she knew the
Yep.
context that that was offered in.
And she knew
Oh,
she wanted to avoid that, right?
of
Like,
course,
this
it's a
is an
terrible thing.
outcome
Clearly,
that I don't want to have. Yeah.
yeah.
And then studies have found that 40 to 60% of elementary school girls ages 6 to 12 are concerned about their weight and or becoming fat.
And we talked about this before I hit record, that preparing for this conversation brought up some interesting memories for me, because I'm a pretty slim person now, but I was comparatively a big kid. And in my 4th grade classroom, for some reason, the teacher put all of our weights up on the door. I can't remember why. There might have been other information there too, like height, or I don't know. But that's the one I remember because I was the
Mm-hmm.
heaviest person in the class, male or female. And I remember there was quite a bit of shame attached to that I should have been at the bottom of the list, like all the sweet little pixies. And instead, I was
Yeah.
this giant lump at the top of the list.
Yeah. And like, mentioned that you haven't thought about it in a while, so clearly
Mm-mm.
it's been a little bit buried, but it had such an impact on you, and there was probably some way that shaped you or different behaviors that you engaged with as
Oh,
a
yeah.
result of that. I mean,
My
like,
early teens, there was a lot of time of not eating at all, and,
yeah,
celebrating how powerful it felt to deny hunger.
yep,
So
yep. And
dumb.
I think, we even connected on the subject of this podcast because I had put up an Instagram post that was really talking about what my experience as someone who was born in 1980, so on the tail end of Gen X, beginning of the millennials, and what it was, what I went through, like growing up in 1980, like Diet Coke was invented in 1980s. The step aerobics was big, right? Like my mom had the Jane Fonda, videos and things like that. And I remember even on the refrigerator growing up, my mom had a magnet that says nothing tastes as good as being skinny feels.
Yeah.
And that was like the
I think that's a
touchstone,
Kate Moss
right? Like,
quote.
yes, and it was on the refrigerator,
Yeah.
which was like to make you think twice before you ate something, right? Like,
So
and
dumb. So
it's
dumb.
just, it was messages everywhere. And I really do think that, in a lot of ways that stuff is improving. We're more aware of this messaging, but it's not gone.
Yeah.
It's still in a lot of places. It's a little bit maybe even more covert than it used to be.
Hmm.
It's really interesting how those messages have changed, but it's undeniable to me that those messages shaped my body image. Like my father and the things that he said to me were one aspect of it, right? Because back in those days we didn't have social media, right? Like we
Hmm.
couldn't blame the internet, but we were surrounded by people in our lives. And what I found, in the research was really where we see kids starting to develop poor body image, or where their body image is formed, is really in the relationship that is closest to them. So when they start to become aware of themselves and their appearance in the world, and they're aware that people in the world are judging, criticizing, and comparing appearances, and then there's this innate need in children to be seen and accepted by their parents, their family, their peers, and the world around them, right? We have this human desire to be connected and to be accepted by those around us. So it's really, for me, like I said, I can't blame social media for the beginning, for the roots of it. But this kind of impresses on us the social, the cultural, and the environmental impact that everything that we have around us, everything that we're surrounded by, has the ability, the potential to impact how we feel about our bodies from a very early age.
Yeah, it's the air we breathe. It's the ocean
Yes.
that we're swimming in. And these days, you're right, it goes beyond traditional media. It goes beyond older brothers and sisters and parents and cousins and teachers to social media. And even though there's a different body type that is celebrated today compared to the one that was celebrated when I was a little bit older than you, but when we were young, there's still a type, isn't there? And if you don't
Yes.
have these days a tiny little snatched waist and a big juicy butt, you're still a failure. And that's not
Yep.
really any more helpful than the heroin chic or the supermodels of the 80s. Or
No.
yeah, the idea that you have to fit some external mold is just dumb. It's such a stupid waste of
Yeah.
energy.
And I think it even gets more interesting in this age of AI and photoshopping and filtering,
Hmm.
where what we're seeing now, like, remember, we're talking about body image being a perception, right? A perception of ourselves, the way that we see ourselves, regardless of the facts, right?
Hmm.
And so if we see ourselves, we perceive ourselves in relationship to what we perceive other people to be, even though they are not, because they have been filtered, they have been photoshopped, it's AI, right? Now we have this even greater divide between, the reality of the two things that we're comparing. We have this warped perception that many of us have about who we are and what our physical appearance is like. And then we have ourselves, we're being compared to things that aren't even real, right? That I find that it's discouraging in a lot of ways, that, like, after all these years of looking at body image, and we're still really, just struggling to keep up with the next
Yeah.
thing, right? And we see this in age as well. I feel like as women, we go through this phase of being children into puberty where our bodies change. And there's this desire to grow up, and in that comes like the sexualization of our bodies as we start to get older through our teenage years. And then we go through the years where we're reproductive, or we choose not to be, whatever the case may be. And then me coming into the beginning of perimenopause and being in this world now, is like, I feel like it was every step along the way, we got a different challenge with respect to our body image, right? It's like, it wasn't just like, I feel like sometimes I would love to experience life as a man to see if it's different, but like the puberty into, womanhood, into menopause, into the post-menopause era, we have different things we're contending with. And I'm seeing a lot of the people that I work with who had great body image for most of their lives, worked really hard at it, are now hitting perimenopause and menopause and struggling with their body image because their body is changing in a way that feels out of control to them. And they're comparing themselves to the person they used to be and perceiving themselves now as less worthy or less valuable or less attractive. And that's really heartbreaking to see people using themselves as that marker to compare themselves to.
Yeah. Yeah. What you're describing with the self-perception compared to our flawed perception of other people, it's like being in a hall of mirrors, isn't it? Where you're never
Yeah.
quite grasping reality. It's just a reflection of a reflection of a reflection of a reflection of a reflection. And meanwhile, the standards change every day, every week, every month, every season, every year. There's always endless
Yeah.
ways for us to fail. And
Yeah.
it sounds to some extent kind of like a superficial conversation, like, oh, isn't it difficult not feeling like you're pretty? But it's not
Mm-hmm.
that at all, is it? What are some of the
No.
negative effects that we see from having a poor body image, a poor self-image?
Yeah. And this is one that's really well documented in the
Mm,
research. So we know that what can it look like first? Like, so poor body image can look like compulsive or excessive exercise, like inability to take a day off. You feel like you have to keep exercising because if you don't, something about your body is going to change, right? There's valuing a good appearance as necessary for your self-worth, right? I see that a lot in my clients where they're like, I don't look good, in this moment, or I don't look good at this time in my life, and therefore I'm not worthy, or I can't think well of myself. Like it's a prerequisite. Consistent self-criticism is one that I see a lot. I mean, it sounds kind of trite to think that these, like, oh, I look so fat, or these little comments that we make about ourselves, to think that they're just that is not true. They do have this eroding effect over time. Persistent comparison to others, we're talking about that, or to yourself, some past version of yourself. And then the really heartbreaking one is avoiding doing things or being photographed because you have anxiety about around how you look. Now you can imagine, like, those behaviors have big implications, right? So poor body image increases the likelihood of disordered eating habits. And what I'm seeing lately is less of the anorexia and bulimia that we were seeing before, and more
mhm.
of the orthorexia, where
Yeah.
people are obsessed with only eating clean foods and not eating toxic foods and chemicals and things like that. And it becomes a really disordered eating pattern where they're maybe not even able to fuel themselves effectively because they're not eating enough calories to fuel what they're doing. You pair that with something like excessive or compulsive exercise, which can lead to injuries. Clearly, if you're
Mhm.
working out a lot and you're not resting enough, then that can lead to injuries. Depression and psychological issues are really prevalent among people who have poor body image, low self-esteem, and then sexuality and relationship issues. If you are not wanting to do things because you have anxiety around the way you look, that's going to affect how well you connect with other people. So, yeah, there's really some big implications here. It's not just as simple as, like you said, a vanity issue. It really does affect your quality of life and your ability to connect with other people, your ability to take care of yourself properly. And your mental health is certainly at risk.
Because
Yeah.
you're living in a home that you hate. You're living in a
Yes,
home that you feel uncomfortable in. How could that have anything but negative consequences?
absolutely.
And I love that you
Absolutely.
touched on orthorexia there, because I do feel like that's a little more of what we see in the yoga world. Like, it's not
Mhm.
about me fitting into a certain size pair of jeans. It's about me being clean, and it's about me being
Yes.
healthy,
Hmm.
and eating pure foods and moving my body. We can almost medicalize that negative self-image. And we've both had the experience of being in a high rated BMI by medical practitioners, of
Yep.
you know, being in a category that they're concerned about because we've got enough muscle mass that it puts us in a category of people that are overweight.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
again,
we had this conversation before. I remember because I was categorized that way, and I've always been in a high
yeah.
BMI. I just hold on to muscle, right? And I'm very short, so that doesn't help. And I got classified like that in my doctor's office a few years back, and I started receiving all of these emails from my doctor's office about how to lose weight, and I was like, well, this is weird, but I mean, maybe
Hmm.
they're just sending out information for people, right? And I asked my doctor about it when I saw her the next time, and she's like, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's because they classified you as being overweight in your BMI. And so you're getting those as a result of that. And I was like, oh, interesting. Because
Yeah, and
I'm an ultra
regardless of,
marathoner who lifts weights and is a nutrition coach. Like,
I'm
this is
probably fine.
crazy.
Yeah, but
And
even if you weren't, the fact that you
no.
didn't even have to opt into that, the fact
Yep.
that you didn't have to express
Yep.
any interest in that, the fact that it was medicalized. I
Yep.
mean, if you're
And
somebody who isn't into vanity, but
exactly.
you're impressed by the
Hmm.
white coat, how can
Hmm.
that not impact
Yep.
your body image?
Yep. And I remember thinking, like, I'm in this place in my life and in my career where I'm not affected by what happened in that situation. But many of the people that I've worked with would have been very damaged. Their body image would have taken a really big hit at that point if that had happened to them. And that was what really broke my heart about that situation. It wasn't necessarily about what I endured, but there are plenty of people who, in that same situation, would have had a much different takeaway from that conversation.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's the sort of sneaky side of it these days that troubles me, is that it has an in through the avenue of health and wellness. And some of that messaging can be really hard to unpick from actually wanting to be well and wanting to feel good in your body and wanting to take
Hmm.
care of your body and to
Yeah.
nourish it with good food and to support it with good movement habits. It's very difficult to untangle the reality from those perceptions.
Hmm. Yeah. And the perpetual optimization of physical health is
Hmm.
not always good for our mental health.
Yeah.
Right? It looks like, let's just suck the fun out of our lives completely. We'll be in really great health, but it'll really be miserable for us to live those extra years that we've earned for ourselves. Like, I tell people all the time, like, if I am doing all of this, right, this healthy stuff to take care of myself, to earn myself potentially some good years, there better be birthday cake in those extra years. Like, I don't want more years if there's no
Yeah.
birthday cake in them, right? So I do think that it is a challenge in the health and fitness realm, in the
Hmm.
yoga world and in all of the health and fitness space right now, where we have to be careful around the conversations of perpetual optimization of physical health, which I feel like we're just full of cold plunges and this special drink and this thing, and it's all like about like optimizing your physical health. To what end? I
Yeah.
mean, like, and we're forgetting that there's a huge component of health and well-being that is not your physical health, that is your mental health. And body image is one of those things that I think can be really pervasive. And that is that a lot of the reasons, the motivations why people have to be uber healthy, right, can be very damaging mental health issues, like especially poor body image. Regardless of how somebody looks on the outside, they could have really terrible body image. And that could be the self loathing that they're using to drive these healthy behaviors to an extreme, where they're sacrificing that mental health aspect in order to appear to be this specimen of physical health.
Mhm. Yeah, I think this is where it gets challenging for those of us who teach yoga and hold yoga spaces, because
Yeah.
there are a lot of takeaways from yoga that can be incredibly powerful.
Oh
What
yeah.
was coming to mind as you were talking there were, to me the balance between sthira and sukha, or diligent
Mhm.
practice and non-attachment. Like, yes, we want to take care of ourselves, we want to show up regularly and do the things that make us feel good and help us function well. But there is a need for softness around that, a loosening of the grip. You can't hold it too tight or it will slip through your fingers. That there can't be a compulsiveness about it.
Yeah.
And that duality is really a lot of what we teach in yoga. So there are some big positives, but I think
Yeah.
there are some sneaky negatives in yoga as well. There is
Mhm.
a yoga body that many of our students don't have. I don't have. You
I
don't
don't have
have.
it
We don't
either.
have the perfect yoga. I mean, what even is the perfect yoga body? There are sneaky little messages that we send about lean sculpted muscles and
Mhm.
all of this kind of crap that just sneaks its way even into yoga spaces, which we would all love to be safe and
Yeah.
welcoming and healing spaces.
Yeah. The the burn, right? The burning, the torching of, calories, or extra
Impurities.
fiery flows, things like that, that have this this sneaky little, innuendos there around what does that mean exactly. Like, I need to feel bad about what I ate yesterday. Do I need to burn off holiday excess, things like that. It's Yes, there's still some sneaky stuff there, particularly around like the look of bodies, right? Like you had mentioned, the yoga body and the lean sculpted muscles. There's also, speaking as somebody whose body image issues are evolving as she evolves, there's definitely a lot of, and this isn't specific to the yoga world, but it is specific, I think, to the wellness space, is um, the anti-aging
Oh,
aspect
yeah.
of things, right? It's like as if an aging body is a bad thing, right? An aging body, in my mind, is a gift. I mean, not everybody gets the luxury and the joy of being able to grow old in this world. So I think, just being mindful too of ability, right? Because ability is also part of your body image, how it performs, whether you think it's good enough, right? So the full expression of the pose, language that we use sometimes in the yoga space can be problematic as well, because you're pointing out to people that they're not fully expressing the pose if they're not doing the pose the way that it's fully expressed, right?
Mhm.
And anything really about the physical appearance, toned, lean, yoga body, all of that stuff, and even gender conformity, I think sometimes can be a little bit of an issue, right? There's conversation around what it means to be feminine and what it means to be masculine in the yoga space as well. And I can imagine that that is challenging for people who because part of your body image is your ability to identify with others in your gender. So yeah, there's a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things that we have to consider in terms of what standard are we setting in the yoga room, right? Like what,
Mm.
because we're talking about here a perception and a comparison to, so if we're offering something up as a full expression or an ideal or a standard in the yoga room in any way as a teacher, we're opening the door for our students to be measuring themselves against that standard. And I think,
100%.
as we talk about function, I think that's a great standard perhaps to, hold people to. But when we're talking about the way that something looks and the way that there's the experience that we want people to have, then it starts to get a little tricky.
Yeah, and I think the challenge there is we forget that people fill in the blanks themselves, or they'll
Mhm.
finish the sentence themselves. So we don't have to say, if you can do the full expression, you're awesome. And if you can't, you're not. We don't even have to say that. Just using the phrase full expression, or if you can, people will finish the rest of the sentence of judging
Mhm.
themselves as
Yep.
passing or achieving that standard or not.
Yep.
And that's
Yep.
where it becomes really difficult as a teacher to speak, because you don't even have to say words for people to say them in their own minds. and
Right.
for them to hear judgment that you might not even think you're
Yeah.
offering. So
Yeah.
I guess we've talked about all the negatives, haven't we? We've talked about how sneaky body image is, how it's not based on reality but perception, and therefore it's difficult to counter. We've talked
hmm
about how early it forms, 4 years, 5 years, judgments people have about their bodies when they're sweet, beautiful little kids.
hmm
We've talked about how it's not just about vanity and looking in the mirror and feeling unsatisfied or having trouble zipping up a pair of jeans. It's literally how you move through the world, how you feel
Yeah.
about yourself shapes how you feel about others. It impacts massively on your mental health and your capacity to
hmm
take care of yourself, to do the things that actually do help you feel good for the long term. We've talked about
Yep.
all the sneaky side alleys like optimizing your health and biohacks and anti-aging and all of the things that deny the fact that you have a body that is going to change over time, full stop, end of story.
Yep.
We've talked about how difficult it is in yoga to create spaces that don't make people feel judged and less than. So maybe we start offering some little tendrils of hope to people. What can we
Yes.
do if we're yoga teachers or coaches or mentors? What can we do to help foster more positive body image?
I think we have. This. The great news is that I think we have in these spaces an enormous potential for assisting people with navigating this. I kind of, as I was thinking through this problem of like, what are the takeaways? Okay, there's a problem. What do we do? Right. I broke it down for myself to think about it in different ways. Is the first way is if you are a coach or if you are a one-on-one yoga teacher with some, because you're going to be able to affect people's body image differently depending on how you're interacting with them, right? So if you are somebody who has a one-on-one relationship with a student, whether as a yoga teacher or as a coach or whatever your capacity is that you're working with this person, the tools of yoga are still really helpful. One of the first things, and I feel like a broken record every time I come on here and I talk about like mindset stuff or behavior change, I always say the same thing: non-judgmental awareness is the key to so much of unlocking anything that you're dealing with in terms of mindset or body image issues. Is cultivating curiosity and learning to experience through your body with less judgment, right? And so with yoga practice, we're watching the thoughts without attaching to them. We're feeling sensations without making them mean something, right? So we're trying to strip the judgment away from the actual sensations and experience of being in a body. That's first step. You can't go any further down these paths unless you've established that, because the next thing that I would say is that it's about managing your mind. Like our I think it was Jason Crandall who said, your brain generates thoughts like clouds generate rain, right? It's
Mm.
their job. They generate
Hmm.
thoughts. Not every thought you have about yourself or the world around you is true, and not every thought you have is helpful, right? So mind management is really about saying, is this true, right? This thought that I have about myself. And if you think it's true, is it helpful? Is it a
Hmm.
helpful thought to attach to? Or is there some other thought that would be also true, but more helpful for you to work
Hmm.
with, right? It's not, but again, you can't get there unless you're able to sit with your thoughts long enough to not numb them out and push them away so that you can see, what are you really thinking, and is it true, and is it helpful? And then really working with self compassion and those moments when you're hearing that self critical voice, that self criticism, and switching into, again, something more true, something more helpful, more self compassion, right? You're a human being. Like you said, your body is going to change throughout your life. It's just the way it's going to be. And, meeting those moments in your life with more compassion and less criticism. Again, a lot of that is really just about choosing which thoughts you're going to allow to occupy your space. And then the last one in the one on one relationship that I think is really important is helping your student or your client create and notice moments of positive body awareness when things feel good, when an experience is nice and enjoyable, right? Having these, what the research calls positive embodiment experiences. So as a fitness coach, as a strength coach, as a conditioning coach, I work with my clients to, lift more weight, and they're like, "Oh my god, I'm really strong." And like that has a really good impact on people's body image when they start to
Mm-hmm.
see their body as maybe not something that's just an ornament for people to, adore and look at and comment on the beauty of, but as like something you can use and leverage in your life. So just helping people notice good experiences in their body
Mm-hmm.
and have opening the door to potential for them to feel good. As a yoga teacher, that looks like just creating and sequencing a class that feels good in people's body. When they leave, they're like, and even having that moment, right before Shavasana, where you're just kind of soaking in the experience and just feeling how things have changed from the moment you started class to the end. So just literally just giving people a reason to have a good experience in their body can have really positive effect as well.
And
Yeah.
it's funny how many people need permission to do things just because they feel good.
Yeah.
Because there's that kind of Protestant work ethic of,
Yeah.
it's the hard thing that will be beneficial. And sure, doing hard things is beneficial, but you don't have to do hard things all the time.
No.
And that, I think, really leads into your first point about non-judgmental self-awareness, of knowing what stuff just feels good, what stuff
Hmm.
feels difficult or challenging or new or awkward, and what stuff just plain feels bad, and not telling yourself a story about what that means, but just gathering information like a
Yes.
researcher of the experience of being inside your body, getting to know yourself and how you interact with the world. And I
Yeah.
do think as teachers, especially as you say, one on one, we have so many opportunities to model that with something as simple as a student saying, which one's harder, option A or
Hmm.
option B, and answering, it totally depends on what you're looking for. Option A
Hmm.
requires a bit more stability. So if you want to work on
Yeah.
stability, that's probably where we should lean. Option B is more upper body strength. So if that's what we're looking for, we can lean in that direction. But just
Yeah.
teasing apart the black and white basic thinking and introducing to them, it all depends. It all depends on
Yeah.
what you're looking for. There's no easy
Yep.
story here. It all depends on the what, the why, the how.
Yeah.
Mm.
Presenting them as different options for different
Yes.
things versus
Yes.
this one's better than this. There's a hierarchy. There's no
Yeah.
hierarchy. We have made the
Mm-mm.
hierarchy up, right? Do you want, do you want to be challenged a little bit more? Do you want to have fun? If it feels good to
Mm-hmm.
you, if this seems interesting, right? All of these things are things you could throw out there instead of full expression of the pose. Or if you'd like to go
100%.
further, right? Like if this seems interesting to you, that's how I used to kind of teach it, is if it sounds fun, try this, right? If
Mm-hmm.
not, stay where you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes more about giving the student choices, which is going to make it more likely that they leave class with a positive embodiment experience, which in and of itself is going to make the body image start to improve. Right, the more negative experiences we have in embodiment, the more likely it is we are to develop poor body image. The more positive experiences we have, the more likely it is we'll lean in that direction. So I think there's really, it challenges teachers to get a little bit creative in how they present these options. But
Mm-hmm.
certainly, if you are up on the anatomy and on what each phase or part of each pose is really doing, you can definitely lean into that, because you can start to educate your students about why this one might feel better to them, or why this might be better for them than this one, even though this one appears to be more difficult, right? Because if your
Mm-hmm.
student is very flexible, flexibility isn't difficult for them, right? Like if you're so like the way that we even rate difficulty is very subjective. It's not like, I mean, I would argue that certain things are more difficult than other. I mean, like, we would probably have a whole
100%.
conversation around like what you think is more difficult and what I think is more difficult. It's still a perception. It's still very subjective.
And I do think this is easier to do one on one because you are
Yes.
literally tailoring the practice to one person.
Yes.
So you're helping them tease out what's the easy thing for me. What's the
Yeah.
hard thing for me? What's the enjoyable thing for me? What's the awkward or new thing for me? The whole premise of the conversation is unique and individual. And it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that in a group. You just have to
Yeah,
leave a lot more space, don't you? Because everyone's
you do.
experience is likely to be different. So let's talk a little about suggestions on working with groups.
Yes. So working with groups, still going to lean hard on cultivating curiosity and rather than judgment, right? So having your students try things different ways can be
Mm-hmm.
a really good way to like spark curiosity rather than because some people are going to have a little bit, like we said, a little bit easier time with the flexible part of the pose, and some people are going to have an easier time on the stability part of the pose. It has nothing to do with difficulty.
Good
It
or
has to
bad.
do with right what that individual person is really excels at as an individual, or what their anatomy is, right, or what their background is. So just having students try different things different ways and having them look at it with an attitude of curiosity as opposed to judgment. What does that mean about you if you like this versus that? It doesn't matter, right? Like what is just what's different about it? What do you like about it, right? Asking these
Mm-hmm.
questions to really spark that curiosity, because that's how you're going to hook into a more positive embodiment experience. They're not measuring themselves against other people, and B, it's really gonna really cultivate that non-judgmental awareness of like, this one just this one I was more shaky, and this one, like they're starting to just explore but not attach a judgment to it. And that's what
Yes.
we really want, because we know that's the first piece. I also think that sequencing for success of your students in a way that creates space where all body types can thrive. So when you're offering options for poses, it's not to say that you can't teach difficult poses or complex poses or arm balances or anything like that. There's definitely, I think it requires teachers to have a higher level of skill to be able to offer and create a space where any body type in the room can get the fundamental elements of those pieces on their own terms in a way that's not set up in a hierarchical capacity, right? So we're creating space for students to explore the elements of the pose in different variations with different relationships to gravity, right? What does this pose look at if you put it on your back, right? That's a good one for arm balances, is like
Mm-hmm.
in the beginning you can put them on their back, right? Or you can have them do this elements of the pose as you're doing your build up to that pose, right? You can give people like offshoots and things. Um, I think also normalizing diversity in appearance and ability. And I think this is where yoga medicine teachers tend to really excel, is that there's a lot of education around individual anatomical variations, and that it's people aren't going to look the same doing the same pose. It's not how it's going to work, and that's okay, and that's normal. So not tying an ideal anatomical situation or a variation of the pose to someone's goodness at yoga, right? It has nothing to do with that. And then the last one that I would say is to really be mindful of your cueing and your messaging. Be mindful of only praising the able-bodied, perfectly executed poses students in the room, or only giving, if you're an assist giver, only giving assist to certain types. I mean, there's a lot of things that can be read between the lines around ability. And then again, commenting on flexibility or lack thereof. Ability is if somebody has poor body image around appearance, they're also going to have some issues around their ability and be sensitive around those, and they can create a feed forward loop into poor body image as well.
Mm. Lots of good stuff in there. And hopefully, for people who listen to the podcast regularly, a lot of those ideas are things we've discussed before in other contexts. It's
Mhm.
just
Yeah.
generally good teaching practice to not offer options as a hierarchy, but as different versions or variations depending on what the student's looking for today. And I
Mhm.
think even just mentioning in passing that proportions and joint position and orientation will vary someone's experience of a pose, just planting those seeds can make a huge difference. So if I'm teaching something like malasana, a deep squat, I will always pretty much without fail mention, due to the proportions and positions of your hip joints, your knee joints, your ankle joints is going to look pretty different for all of us. So maybe your heels are lifted and you're leaning forward on your hands. Maybe you feel better with your feet closer together or your feet wider apart. Maybe you're sitting with your sit bones on the floor and your feet out in front of you, or you're sitting on a block or a couple of blocks. Find some version that you can make peace with, so that
Yes.
even in something as simple as that, I'm modeling the fact that this is just going to be different for different people.
Yeah.
And another thing I do really take care to model is my body feels different on different days. So today I'm going to show you options A, B, and C. I'm not going to do option D. It doesn't feel great for me today. Or I do
Yeah.
it, then I go, I don't like that. And I go back to option B. So I'm modeling when I'm demonstrating. Just because I can do option D or option A doesn't mean I do. I will model the fact that I'm choosing, I don't like that option for me today. This feels better for me today. And I'm
Yeah.
encouraging my students to make similar decisions.
Yeah. And I think for teacher longevity, that's important, right? You need to not
Yeah.
feel like you have to show up and perform for your students, right? And the students in the room that know what, I mean, if you say, we're here and if you feel like doing side crow, go for it, right? Like the people in the
Yeah.
room who do side crow know what it is. You don't have to demonstrate it for them, right? So I think, yes. And then I also love that you're letting people in on your thought process there as a teacher is like, because I've done that too, where I've been, sort of leading into or cueing into a pose, and then I go, if you're happy here, you can stay. I'm going to switch back to this one because this just doesn't feel right for me today. And just letting them know and normalizing that, right?
Yes.
It's okay if you show
Yeah.
up and you're like, I don't know what's up. I just don't like it today. Right.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. And that's going to enable your students and they're going to learn that it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to, kind of, you tried it, it didn't feel great, you don't need to stay there, right? You
Yeah.
want to give them the autonomy to make these decisions so that they leave having a positive embodiment experience
Yes.
and not more fuel for their poor body image, right? It's the subtle things that we do, and modeling is just such an important one. I mean, I always feel like I talked a lot in my yoga classes, but I was talking people through my thought process a lot of times, or I was walking them through a lot of different options that they had, and ending with, here's the experience that I'd like you to have, which isn't like, I want you to be like white knuckling your way through this pose, right? It's like, if you're white knuckling your way, you might want to just settle down for a second, right? But to say, like, you want it, like you said, to be at a place where you can make peace with, right? To be
Yeah.
in a position that feels like you can stay here without losing your mind for 5 minutes or a minute, right? Whatever the case may be. Or do you really want them to be comfortable and at rest? Are you searching for that experience, right? But giving them that choice is really important. But like you said, modeling how you arrive at that choice is almost even more important, because not everybody feels like they have permission to change or to not do what's being demonstrated, right? Or to not do what the majority of the class is doing. So putting that out there and normalizing that it's okay to change your mind, and it's okay to not even have a reason for why you don't want to do this today. You just don't want to do it, and that's completely fine. Yep.
Yes. And I also tend to sequence in short bursts of kind of find your own adventure. So if I've done, a long series on one side, or if we've been in a long pose, when we come out, I'll say you could curl back to child's pose if that sounds nice to you. You could find a comfortable seat. You could lie on your front. You could lie on your back. Maybe there's something that you want to move to kind of give it a rinse out. And I found that the more, not often, because you can't do a whole class of just do whatever you want, but the more
Right.
consistently over time I offer that, the more comfortable people are finding their own thing. And so now it's relatively normal in my classes to have, 45 seconds or a minute of everybody doing something different. And I love that. And I love the experience that it gives to new students looking around the room going, oh, well, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right, that's right. I guess I'll test
Yeah.
out what the person next to me is doing. And that can
See
be
how it
really
feels.
powerful too. That's
Yeah.
the seed of the person having their own practice of going, how do I feel? What do I
Yep.
need? How do I execute that need? So I love
Yep.
that. And the other thread that I wanted to draw on of what you were talking about was not making it a thing. if a student chooses option B over option A, or they ask you a question after class of, why did I find this difficult? Not making it a story like, well, that's because your lowest chakra is blocked, or, that's because you don't want to let go of control, but just saying, yeah,
Mhm.
they're different options. This one does a little bit more of X. This one challenges a little bit more of Y.
Yeah.
Maybe that was just today. Maybe you give it a try again next time you practice, and see what comes up, but really be
Mhm.
curious about the experience and
Yeah.
what it feels like for you. So
Yep.
inviting that curiosity rather
Totally.
than trying to be wise and all
Labeling
knowing
it.
and making it a
Yep.
story.
Yep.
Hmm.
You create that label and you create a judgment around it, right? Like, and that's, I think that's one of the things that we have this power as a teacher to not help validate someone's body image issues by not giving them a label around these things, like, and not even, I don't even like to answer that question, like I really just start asking questions in response to it, like, where were you feeling the sensation? What did it feel like? Do you feel that in other poses that you do? Did you where did you feel good, right? Were there poses where that wasn't an issue for you? And you just start asking more questions, and they start to realize that all of these questions are something that is okay to have. Like, we don't have to have all of these answers. We don't have to call it something. We don't have to label it and put ourselves into little buckets. It can just be that that pose was more difficult for you today. It may always be more difficult for you. And the more that they start to ask the questions, the deeper into the curiosity they go. And that's a good thing. We want them asking questions about their experience. Like you said, if they're looking around the room and they're going, okay, so these are all the options, I'm just going to do what this guy over here is doing. And then they do it and they're like, this feels terrible.
Yeah.
Like, that's good. We want them to explore it and then be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to flip over and try what this guy over here is doing, because that is how we make it okay for people to come into yoga class and try it and start looking for the experience they want to have in the yoga room, not the experience that is imposed on them, but they come in with their own expectations of what they want from a yoga class. And the less as teachers we get involved with giving them an experience and just creating an environment where they can have the experience and they can get curious about which choices can I make in this yoga class that'll lead me to have the experience that I'm looking for. And then it becomes a practice that they own, a way that they create good body image inside themselves. It's not coming from you as the teacher. You're creating the space for that. You're creating the potential and the opportunity for that. We want the students to be empowered to recognize that when they're not in the yoga room, when they're not with you as their yoga teacher, they still have the power to make decisions that will allow them to have a positive body embodiment experience. We want them to feel that and carry that with them outside of the yoga room.
I could not love that anymore. I totally agree. And I think it sometimes gets lost in all of the exploration of, optimization, and that you were talking about earlier, finding this perfect state of health and embracing the
Yeah.
challenge. All of these are, it's good to be healthy. Of course, it's good to find
Yes.
challenges. You love doing hard things, but it's
Yeah.
also really important to know, what are the feel good things? What are the nice things? What do I like? What do I
Yeah.
enjoy? What soothes me? What settles me? And the more often we have good, safe, enjoyable experiences in our own bodies, the more likely we are to feel courageous enough to try something awkward or difficult, or somewhere where we
Yeah.
don't shine, but whatever, we find it fun. And I guess this is leading us
Yeah.
into what suggestions you'd give to us as individuals, as just people showing up in our own practice or in our own life. Is there anything additional you'd add that would help us have a more positive experience of living in this miraculous body?
Yeah, I think that this is, kind of going back to kind of thinking about it in terms of like being a coach or a teacher in a one-on-one relationship. And really, you're in a relationship with yourself, right? Your body image is really tied to and embodies and encompasses the relationship you have with yourself. So going back to those tips of, cultivating curiosity rather than judgment, right? Like, the experience. I know there was a class that Tiffany did that I really loved that was kind of tuning into some of the experiences that might feel like tingly, or there were words that she was using that were descriptions, not labels of,
Mm-hmm.
like anxiety or restlessness, right, or things like that. And it was really just kind of looking at your body as a collection of pieces that fit together, not parts, individual parts, and fixating on one thing, but really allowing yourself the moment and the time to experience without the judgment and without the labels, to just get curious about the feelings and the sensations in your body, to watch your mind. It will generate thoughts, and not all of them are true, and not all of them are helpful. And typically when I'm coaching somebody or working with somebody, the further along in it we get, the more self-aware they become, the
Mm.
more they start to hook thoughts together. So they'll say the unhelpful thought, and then they'll say, but I also know this is true, and it's like, then why don't we just go with that half, right? Why don't we just embrace this one as being the truth of what you're going to hold on to, and manage the flow of what's coming out of your brain, and not allowing yourself to be so taken or swept up by one thought that is really unhelpful, especially if there are true helpful thoughts bouncing around in there. And
Mm.
then, yeah, watching the self-criticism and watching your own self speak, and noticing those times when you're really eager to throw a label on something, right? A pose is hard for me today, and it's really, my brain immediately goes to, what did I have been doing for the last 24 hours? Am I stiff? Like, am I losing my mobility? Am I getting old? Like,
Mm-hmm.
like we start to want to create a reason or an answer for why something is different, but your body is just going to be different each day. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it is the way that it is. And so having to have an answer and label it, and using those labels to make us feel bad about ourselves, is not what we want to be doing in our yoga practice, I'm guessing. I don't want to leave my yoga practice feeling worse than when I started. And then, yeah, putting yourself in a position. And sometimes that means, if you're taking a public class, if you're taking a class in the studio, and there are things being offered to you, we say this all the time, but minding your ego, right? Because that can lead you to having an experience that was not part of your intention when you walked into that class. If you walked in wanting to feel good about your body and feeling good about yourself, and you're pushing yourself too hard, and you're falling out of poses, and like, that is not going to help you have the experience that you're looking for. And just going into classes with that mindset of like, what's the intention here? What is the experience I want to have, and how can I make choices along the way that lead me closer to that experience? And getting curious about why maybe something didn't give you the experience you were after, and not turning that into self-criticism. I mean, we're seeing a circle here, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's this
And you
loop
could
that happens.
And you could follow that loop all the way down into the drain, or you
You
could
could.
follow it out into
Mhm.
expansive, spacious, bright light.
Yeah,
Yeah, you get to decide which direction that spiral goes. I love that. And I think
absolutely.
one of the really powerful words that I've heard you say several times is today. That really helps me disconnect from a story that I'll tell myself is, I'm finding this challenging today, or I'm finding this helpful today, or I'm finding this awkward today, and not turning that into, it's because I'm X or it's because
Yeah.
I'm Y, but just today. That in
Yeah.
itself gives it space.
It may not
Tomorrow,
always be
who
like this.
knows?
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. You have to leave room for the potential for there to be change, right? If it could change that quickly, where today it's a challenge and it doesn't feel good, then there's an equal amount of potential that tomorrow it'll feel fine and it won't be a
Hmm.
challenge, right?
Hmm.
We're constantly changing. The cells and the chemicals that make us up are shifting and changing and adapting, and every single moment of every single day, it is completely unrealistic to think that we will show up as the same version of ourselves every single day. How boring would that be? But yeah, sometimes today, this isn't going to feel good. It doesn't mean anything beyond right now, at this moment in my life, this doesn't feel good to me.
Hmm.
Okay. Doesn't mean
Yes.
anything bad about me. It just means it doesn't feel good today.
I love that. And I feel like there have been some really powerful takeaways from today's conversation that
I
maybe
hope
aren't
so.
single handedly going to save the world of body image, but will hopefully plant some seeds that people are willing to water and weed and nourish and nurture, that you
Yeah.
do deserve to feel good in your body and you
Yeah.
can feel good in your body. And a lot of that is by just challenging the thoughts that your mind is designed to
Absolutely.
generate. Not all of them are true, not all of them are helpful. You get to decide what you believe and what you act on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important to point out that, like you said, poor body image, body positivity, right? Body acceptance may be a long-term process for our students.
Possibly
And
this podcast hasn't done the work for you.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, for some of our students, it's jumping to positivity, and acceptance is going to be a bridge too far right out of the
Hmm.
gate, right? So,
Yeah.
as teachers, I think it's important that we don't let that fact overwhelm us and stop us from supporting our students so that their body image isn't the thing that's keeping them from practicing.
I want you to repeat that because
As
that's
a
really
teacher, you're
important, isn't it?
yes, yes, your focus, you don't have to save the world. You don't have to turn somebody's body image from poor to stellar in one 60-minute class. Your focus should be on supporting your students so that their body image isn't keeping them from practicing.
100%. Because we all know how powerful the practice is. We can let it work a lot of its magic. We
Yes,
just want to get out of its way to some
yes,
extent and not make up rules that don't exist or stories that don't exist or attach
yes,
judgments that don't exist, but just to keep creating places that, at least for today, mean that somebody's body image is not the reason that they don't
yes.
come back to the mat.
And you even pointed it out as we were going through the tips. All of them are things that most of us are already doing as
Or
good
at least trying
teachers.
to.
Right, exactly. Right. We strive to do these things, or we're aware that they're things that we should be doing more of. And there was a reason for that, because like you said, it's the practice itself will do the work. We just don't want them not coming anymore. Right. We just need to create the space that allows them to want to keep coming so that the practice has time to do what it needs to do. So again, don't get overwhelmed. Don't worry if in a week of students coming to your class, they're not, you know, loving their bodies and accepting their bodies as they are, because that's not your job. That's not your job. Your job is to make sure that they keep coming.
Yeah, I love that. And what prompted this conversation was that you are about to take over a new role of heading up the well-known blog Fit Bottomed Girls, which always has me singing the Queen song in the
Yes.
back of my mind.
Yes.
So maybe we wrap up as we head towards sort of offering people resources for the future. Maybe we talk a little about Fit Bottomed Girls and what that is and who it's for.
Yeah. So Fit Bottom Girls was a blog that was created back in 2008, um, back way before there was any of this body acceptance, body neutrality conversation. I don't know if you remember 2008, but I went back and looked at the magazine covers from 2008 and I was depressed. Um, so this is a 16-year-old blog. It's very well respected. It's won numerous awards. When I quit my job in legal, so I was in legal for 12 years. When I quit my job, I starting a business and I started freelancing for Fit Bottom Girls. And by that point, they were pretty deep into it. They had really pioneered in a lot of ways. They were at the very lead edge of this movement towards body acceptance, this step away from 1,200 calorie a day diets and, lose
Oh,
5 pounds in, 3 days or whatever, the prevailing messaging of health and fitness at the time. Because it was really like, it was so pervasive that it really ended up being that that's what health and fitness were about for women, was losing weight and being skinny, right? It was about thinness. And the creators, Erin and Jen, were really not motivated by this messaging, and they did not believe that you could hate yourself healthy. And I tend to agree with that. So
Yeah.
they were, they were really kind of, like I said, at the beginning, at the very front edge of this. And so there was no roadmap. As for pioneers, you just kind of go, right? And so there were some challenges along the way, but the blog continued until 2020. The two owners at the time were kind of not really sure what to do with it moving forward. Their lives were pulling them in other ways. And since I had written for them for 5 years, they reached out to me and told me that they were trying to sell the blog, but the only buyers they were getting were people that were going to not follow the mission. They were essentially going to use the name as a net for like an SEO farm and really bastardize the work. I mean, there's really no other way to say it. So they reached out to me. They said they'd rather give it to me than sell it to anyone for any price who wasn't going to honor the mission. And I immediately said no, because I have too many other things on my plate. But I spent some time thinking about it, and they really left off in the 30s, right? Of motherhood at 35, right? Was kind of where it cut off. And I think there's a lot more to the story of a woman's life that, there's this whole chapter, right, on perimenopause and then menopause, right? Like, and I think it's really important, especially during those time periods, for women to continue to be active and feel athletic and be adventurous. And that's what my business Miles to Go Athletics is really about, is helping women through all stages of life be active, athletic, and adventurous, even those who just aspire to be, right? And we work with those people as well. So this blog is really going to be in the future a continuation of offering women an alternative to the diet culture and toxic narrative messaging around health and fitness, and really leaning hard into it's we're not necessarily out there chasing a certain look, but we are chasing function and feeling and good experiences in our lives, and this ability to be able to say we've worked our whole lives to create this life that we live in, and we want to be able to enjoy it, right? And I still think that there is a lot of toxic narratives around perimenopause and menopause for women and aging in general. And I'm really out there on a mission to change that and to drown out that noise and give women something else to read and care about and, be motivated by, besides hatred for the way their body looks.
I love that. I mean, I've just had a conversation with Neve Daly about yoga for menopause and beyond. And we were talking about the sort of medicalization of perimenopause and menopause, and how that's brought up a whole new host of body image challenges related to
Yes.
health. Like, how bad is this for me? What damage is occurring now? Am I dying from
Mm-hmm.
this? All of that sort of stuff that adds a whole new flavor to just how good do I look? So this is great. And I think you are the perfect person to do it. I'm excited to see
Thank
what
you.
comes out, including you'll be doing a podcast of your own, I believe.
Yes. Yep. Did 135 episodes of the podcast before they hung up the mic. And now we are going to be picking that up. So the blog and the podcast will be marching forward starting on October 1st.
Exciting times. So that
Yeah.
will definitely be a resource that we'll send people to in the show notes, as well as all of your usual website and social media handles. I'll also link to your previous couple of episodes. One was on yoga for athletes, but the other one was on creating consistent change. And if you're somebody
Yes.
who wants to change how you feel in your body and your perceptions of your body, that would be a really helpful listen, because it's
Yes.
got lots of little practical tips on how to change things bite by bite, step by step,
Mm-hmm.
consistently over time.
Yeah.
I'll link to the episode with Neve as well on yoga for menopause and beyond.
Great.
And I'm going to link to a couple of my yoga journal articles too. One is on the one thing I never say as a yoga teacher, which is full expression. So I've ruined the article for you by telling you what it is. And then I've just
Spoiler.
written one on are the poses you hate, the poses you need, because I think that's
Ooh.
one of those sneaky narratives in yoga. Like, oh, if you hate it, then it must be good for you. Maybe. It's not that straightforward, and it's equally powerful to know what you like and what feels good. So those are all the resources I'm planning to link to. What else? Anything else that you want to leave people with to wrap up today?
Oh, I think the big takeaway here, right, is to just be on the lookout for ways that and working with ways that you can create space where there's some neutral zone for people. You don't, like I said, you don't need to jump them from poor body image to stellar body image, but creating, and that may be a bridge too far for some of your students. So really just any way that you can create more neutrality in the way that people approach or judge or criticize their bodies, right? And like let it be curiosity driven and neutral outcomes, right? Because sometimes the easiest thing for people to do is to just find neutral than it is to go from one extreme to the other. So if you're really ever unsure of how to approach a situation, how can you approach that situation or bring your students into a place of curiosity and neutrality is the easiest touchstone to come back to.
I love that. And that creates such spaciousness for them to have their own experience.
Yes.
I really appreciate that as a final takeaway. Alison, thank you so much for bringing your time and your passion and your energy to this conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So fun to be here again.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you liked the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com. Check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine, or you can email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being part of our Yoga Medicine community.
The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.